Thank you, Dr. Swaminathan. I don't see anyone else wanting to jump in. So let's go to next question. That's Kamran Qasimov, representing a number of media from Azerbaijan. Kamran was with us since the beginning of pandemic. Kamran, please go ahead.
Do you hear me?
Yes, Kamran, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Greetings from Azerbaijan. Now for our country is very actual, the booster dose or third dose, because all effective booster dose or third dose against the Omicron stem, because from the February we are going to booster dose in our country, but exactly Omicron stem capture many countries. And what can you say about this point? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kamran. This is a question about boosters. I think Dr. Swaminathan may say something about that.
So this is an area that, again, the SAGE, the group of experts who advises on policy on vaccines, has been tracking and monitoring, because the need for boosters basically is, again, based on what is the evidence on waning immunity, across which age groups, across which vaccines. And as I mentioned, there is some evidence now that there is some waning that occurs, after 5 or 6 months after the primary course of vaccine has been taken. And essentially, again, this is being measured mainly through the antibody responses. But when we look at clinical effectiveness, when we look at, say, hospitalizations or severe disease, there is a small drop. Again, there is some waning of about, let's say, 8 to 10%. It's a little bit higher in the older age groups, 10%. If you take all age groups, it's more like 7 to 8% at 6 months. And this is why many countries started booster programs, because they wanted to boost or supplement the immune responses that their citizens already had. The WHO basically has been tracking the data and the science, and our recommendations would be based on science. But there was another consideration for us, and that's the whole equity issue. And Dr. Tedros has been speaking to this issue right from the beginning. He spoke to it today as well. The fact that there are still so many unvaccinated people in the world, while in some countries, people are able to receive their third dose. There's even talk of fourth dose in some countries. And so we have to balance the need for boosters to push the immunity if it's waning, particularly in those vulnerable groups, against the imperative to vaccinate frontline workers, the elderly, in all countries, not just in a few countries. And so what we're recommending now, and we had an interim statement on boosters that we put out last week based on the advice of SAGE, is that countries can consider this for their vulnerable citizens, their elderly citizens, those we know have weaker immune systems, immunocompromised, people who are at very high risk of infection and very high risk of severe disease, particularly in the light of very infectious variants, that they could consider boosting, but that should only be done when the country has actually managed to vaccinate its highest risk group with the primary course of vaccination. And we've just heard that there are many countries, many countries, that are still not up to the 40% mark that would have covered the entire vulnerable populations. And so there is need to do both. There is a need to speed up our primary vaccination programs, to share vaccines equitably through COVAX, through AVAT, and there is also a need to further protect those that need that boosting. And so we will recommend the same approach that we did at the beginning on how to countries prioritize their populations. Not everybody needs a booster. An 18-year-old who's just had their first course a few months ago certainly does not need a booster. They're at very low risk of severe disease, whereas an 80-year-old in the same country might actually do better with a booster. because we know that with age, the immune responses are weaker. And so that's the same, exactly the high-risk prioritization groups that we recommended at the beginning, that we're asking countries to follow. And we're also saying, let's share those extra supplies that we have, rather than boosting young people who still have very strong immune responses from their primary vaccination. If we can cover the whole world, then we can think about these future courses and who's going to need it, and when it's going to be needed. Dr. Ryan talked about the future course of the pandemic and how it's going to play out. And we will have to see whether regular vaccines are going to be needed in the future or not, and for which groups. We don't know that at this point. But right now, I think we have to go by the data, and we also have to keep a close look on the equity aspects, because it's not just the ethics, it's, we know, we said repeatedly, it's the epidemiology, the science behind it. We know that if you leave the virus to multiply, as it has been doing now in many countries because of so many unvaccinated people, that ultimately there'll be another variant and another variant. So it's in everybody's interest, self-interest, to make sure that that doesn't happen again, and that we try not to have any more variants of concern after Omicron. We should try, the world should try to do that. Thank you, Tarek.
Thank you, Dr. Swaminathan. Let's move to